Alright, the question of the day: does Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 revive the MCU from its slow box office death, or is it the last nail in its coffin? That is the question of the day on Should You See? Alright, just a warning before we start. I know there are a lot of people who are very picky about spoilers, but it's impossible for me to write and present an honest review without being able to talk about the thing that I'm reviewing. So expect minor spoilers, but nothing that will ruin your enjoyment for the film. I saw this movie in 3D. It was actually a really enjoyable experience. Most of the people in my theater seemed to really like the movie. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 follows the Guardians on a time-sensitive mission to save Rocket's life. This allows the movie to use flashbacks to flesh out Rocket's backstory. That's pretty much the extent of the spoilers that I'll give. This is the third and final installment in James Gunn's trilogy, and compared to the first two, it's different in certain areas. First, this movie is very lean. It wastes no time and jumps straight into the plot. Second, and the most glaring difference, is how much more darker this movie is compared to the first two. The second one, especially more than the first, had dark undertones, but this movie completely embraces it. I was actually quite surprised at how many intense, gory, and grotesque imagery James Gunn was able to sneak into a PG-13 movie, and a Marvel one in particular. These moments, I think, are the only parts of the movie that will keep average moviegoers or ones expecting a tone similar to the first two from enjoying this film. Not to say this movie isn't enjoyable. Like I said, most of the people in my theater were really into it. This movie still has the James Gunn sense of humor. You know, the kind that's a little edgier, the kind that's actually funny. Not the unoffensive, committee-written, milquetoast humor we're used to getting from these films. But this movie isn't just all fun and games. Like I said, the darker elements of the story allow for a more serious, dramatic, and emotionally rich story that wouldn't have worked in the first two. Most of the drama in this film stems from Rocket and the villain of the film, the High Evolutionary. In the comics and in this film, the High Evolutionary experiments on lower life forms to create the perfect version of them, Rocket being just one of his many experiments. I thought the motivations for this villain were a little weak. It's basically he can, so he does. But I do think the actor Chukwudi Iwuji did a phenomenal job playing this character. A major concern I have walking into these films is the CGI. The last couple of Marvel movies have been subpar in this department, Ant-Man 3 being disastrous. But I'm happy to admit that the VFX in this movie were not a problem. They were convincing and never flat-looking. The director definitely had a lot of pull in how this movie looked. James Gunn, I think, is the only person who knew how to seamlessly blend practical and digital effects. I think he's the only person, maybe last person at Marvel, who knew that VFX were there to tell and enhance a story, not distract from a decaying plot. Another aspect of the film that James Gunn knows how to expertly deploy are needle drops. The soundtrack in this film, as always, is incredibly well made, and I think this one just might be my favorite. That could be because the first two volumes are played on repeat in the Hugger household, and I've just heard them too many times. I swear, if I hear the Hooked on a Feeling song one more time, I am going to lose it. In any case, this film's soundtrack is incredibly well built and utilized. Another thing that I was happy about was that they didn't try to push any gender or race politics into this movie. Whether you want to admit it or not, the ham-fisted attempts to stuff radical leftist agendas into these last few Marvel films have played a part in why those films don't do as well. Whether it was James Gunn or somebody else at Disney, I'm glad we finally have a Marvel film that's story first. Lastly, I wanted to conclude this video by talking about what's really at the heart of this story. In the previous films, the plot revolves around the Guardians saving the galaxy, but in this film, it's much more personal. It's much smaller in scope. But at the very center of all three of these films, one theme emerges, and that is family. In the first two films, all the Guardians are running or hiding from familial issues, so they form this makeshift family full of misfits. But at the end cap of this saga, the misfits are done running. It's really bittersweet seeing the pseudo-family we've come to love disband to go off on their own. This truly is the end of an era. Now to answer the question I asked at the beginning of the video, does this save the MCU? This is a phenomenal and defiant film, but the MCU problem is too big for one film to fix. Looking at their upcoming slate, it's impossible for me to imagine any of these movies being good. Only time will tell, but I believe this movie will age well, even if the MCU does not. Now let's move on to my verdict. Alright, I'm giving Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 a 4.5 out of 5. It's as perfect as any Marvel film can be, and I think everybody should see it in theaters if you can. I think most people will enjoy it, although I can see why some people wouldn't. Alright, next episode is Fast X, so expect that in a couple of weeks. And you can follow me on Letterboxd to see what I'm watching daily. And you can listen to the podcast version of this episode only on Spotify. And yeah, subscribe or something so I can keep affording to pay for these videos.